Okay, thanks everybody for coming. We'll go ahead and get started. Yeah, so this is a BoF that's being run by a new working group. A new working group called Policy and Research Organizations for Research Software, or PRO4RS for short. What we're going to try to do today is just to talk a little bit about what's going on, why we're here, why we have this session, why we have this group. And have a little bit of a landscape about research software policies, group discussion, which will be partly a survey and partly a discussion. And then we'll summarize and try to think about what's next. So let's see. So we haven't done any introductions. We should just start by saying that this is a joint group between RDA and RISA, the Research Software Alliance. In general, I think when we're doing things that are software related, we're trying to do them jointly with RISA, trying to bring in people that are interested in both software and data. And I think we potentially kind of learn from each other as well. It's supported, this group is supported by the RDA Tiger program, by the Netherlands eScience Center. And we have 8 co-chairs. We have Michelle Barker, who is from RISA in Australia. Claudia, who's here in the room from FAPESP. Jeremy Cohen, who's online from Imperial College London. I'm Dan Katz from University of Illinois in the US. Kim Martin from Stellenbosch and Dan Rudman from Leiden, I think, are both not here or online. Pedro Hernandez Serrano is here in the front from Maastricht, and Hugh Shanahan is here in the middle. So we all came together and we're all interested in this and wrote up a case study and got through the RDA process with help from the Tiger folks. So this session is actually really intended to help other people understand what we're trying to do, why we started this group, and what its objectives are. We would like people to join the group if you're interested in this topic. If you've been interested in policies for research data in universities and research performing organizations, you may also be interested in research software policies. You can join the working group by just going to the RDA page and clicking join group, as hopefully you've done for other groups. The QR code that's on here is the QR code to the working notes. And so you can also sign up in the working notes, but just be aware that signing up in the working notes just kind of tells people that you were here in the session. It doesn't actually put you on the mailing list, which you'll get to if you join the group. And then you'll hear about things that are happening in the future as well. The other thing that we want to do then is to really, sorry, I'm trying to think about how to say this. We started off with this case study that we came up with. We're not 100% sure if it's the thing that is really best for everybody in the community. And so if there are other things that people want to add to it that seem not to take it too far out of scope, at least, we'd be interested in hearing about that, and we're willing to widen the scope at least a little bit. Yeah, I think that's maybe all that I'm going to say. And so with that, we'll move on to the second piece, and I'll turn this over to Hugh to talk about where we are today in research software, why research software is important, and what policies we have.
All right. Thanks very much, Dan. Okay. Okay. So first what we want to do is to, in some respects, set the scenes with respect to research software and its overall importance. So things that we kind of have to be clear about is to say, well, research software is absolutely essential in today's academic world, and we'll show some figures and facts to demonstrate that. But just to kind of kick things off, we know that open source software, which isn't quite the same thing as research software, is included in the UNESCO recommendations on open science. All that said, what's important to note here is that in many respects, while there's been huge amount of effort in terms of developing data-led policies for research, there's less of that with respect to software management. And the things that we've always argued is to say that these are sort of two sides of the same coin. If you allow me the luxury of being a bit more florid in my language, if we think of research data as almost like the muscles behind the muscle tissue that we see for research software is the nervous tissue in some respect. Okay. Now, one of the things which we do see examples of this, and this is not the fault of people working in research data, is that sometimes there's been this categorical error that's been applied, which can in some respect be this idea to say, well, research data, that's zeros and ones, software, that's zeros and ones too, so just treat them in the same way. All right. And already I know that in this building, people who work on physical samples for data are going, I sensed a disturbance in the force already. But it's the thing really to stress here is to say that research software is not just a type of data. We need to think of separate policies for them. And these are, again, really kind of clear differences. Obviously, software is executable. That's what it's all about. All right. It doesn't just sit there in a static fashion. It degrades with time. So in fact, the software lifecycle is a concept that's been understood for decades. And of course, I can see Claudia's head is going back and forth, but it's the fact that the environments around the software are the things which are continually evolving. So even if the software remains fixed, it looks as if it's decaying. And of course, as you said, from people who, in software engineering, we think about the software lifecycle, which is always about someone saying, well, we need to be continually doing bug fixes. It's also important to note that it's a creative work. All right. Anybody, who's taught first-year computer scientists to say, right, do hello world, print out hello world 10 times, will see the differences in the software that's there. But also, and just the last point on these differences, even with respect to licensing and so on, they are fundamentally different. We, say to people, you don't use MIT or Apache licenses for data. Don't use CC0 for software. We keep those separate. There's this nice paper which sort of notes all of these kind of key attributes associated with research software. And just to, again, perhaps I should sort of clarify and say that research software, we're sort of distinguishing between, the software that, that runs this laptop, or even sort of those more general sort of applications that are there. It's really the software that is being developed to get research done. And it has all of these different ways that it feeds into it. It can be part of instrumentation in terms of filtering data and so on. It can also be the instrument. It's obviously essential in terms of analyzing the data and indeed visualizing the data. All right. Software, you have this sort of hierarchical effect, which is different in some respect from data in terms of it's very often pulling together different components which are pre-built. It's infrastructure, but also it can be a tool. All right. And it's also got that other aspect that it enables collaboration, okay, at distance. Now, just to kind of pin down some of the importance of this, okay? So 20% of NSF projects over an 11-year period discuss software in their abstract. And, it's the survey from that would have said that's equivalent to something like $10 billion worth of funding that's been there directly related to software. We see that software intensive projects form the majority of current publications. the most cited papers, and again, we're not, we don't want to go down the highly cited is the be all and end all, but still most cited papers are ones which are based on methods or software. There's the Research Software Engineering, the Society of Research Software Engineers do a series of surveys, and they've pulled out some fantastic data over the years. And they note that 90% of US and UK researchers make use of research software, all right? 65% of researchers would say they wouldn't be able to do their research. And the other kind of, this one I only read recently was the fact that 50% of researchers are developing software in some respect. All of this is presenting all kinds of challenges for us. First of all, we have a hit in terms of inefficiency, all right? Again, researchers developing software on the fly, figuring it out as they go along, and there's an estimate of 30% inefficiency cost related to software related tasks, and that's mostly about saying to people who aren't used to developing software, saying, "Go on, just do it." Okay. The whole emphasis in terms of, okay, the two important things are getting papers out and getting research proposals out, distorts the development of software. All right. So as you said, software has got its own life cycle. You don't just write it once and then set it out into the world. You should be continually updating it, fixing it, doing bug fixes, and so on. All right. But as a result of the fact that we're kind of saying papers, proposals, and so on, is that very often software is more, most of the time it's very sort of hit and run. It's done, push it out there, and it's and we're done. Very, very sort of short-term thinking. Okay, no thinking about sustainability, no thinking about, indeed, emphasis on reproducibility. And of course, research software, like research data, suffers from a visibility problem. So, you know, CERN can very, very happily show big tubes, big magnets, and so on, and say, look, this is science, all right? As opposed from the colossal stacks of code that, you know, it's software that's being developed to make all that happen, which is just as important, all right? So we have all of these problems that are there, and again, we need to make reforms to actually say, okay, we've got to improve the situation with respect to how we support research software. Now, Brian Nosyk's strategy of culture change is a really, really useful guide here. And what we're kind of looking at is a lot of the effort has to be said, you know, software engineers love to kind of think about, yeah, I can write something here that can just fix everything and make it easy and so on. But actually at the top of that, you've got to think about policies, all right? And that means getting people to say, come on, things that need to get, that need to be done, all right? And that's where Pro4RS come in. And it's coming in a very sort of specific way, all right? So there are many, many different stakeholders that are involved here, and there's a great deal of sort of different areas of work that's going on. So there's researchers themselves, there are the funders, there are the journals, and so on. But here, what this working group is thinking about are about helping the research performing organizations, all right? And in particular, overall, there's these questions of saying, okay, how do we get research performing organizations to guide their developers to use appropriate practices, develop recognition for the value of those practices and the risks associated with not using them, about embedding principles of sustainability and reproducibility into software development, and developing software policy guidance to underpin research quality at RPOs. Okay, so Pro4RS, again, just to stress, the remit is about policies that are for research performing organizations. We won't think about the other stakeholders, because there's lots of other different activities that are going on there covering that. Okay. So overall, here's a list of the kind of aims that we're looking at. Oh yeah, great, that's good. So first of all, it's about building up a community of stakeholders who are developing or promoting institutional level policies. Okay, figure out what's there, and we're off to hopefully to a reasonably good start here. So with that community, we'll identify existing institutional policies and guidelines. All right. I'll skip over the next one. I'll cover that in a little bit. And then from that, look at what the policies that are out there, and then try and synthesize what's going on and come up with a set of principles upon which other software policies, research software policies can be developed. All right. And that means understanding, in particular, where are the gaps in existing policies. All right. Certainly what does appear to form a gap are those issues of sustainability and reproducibility. That seems to be something which is not being that seems to be there, but there could well be other ones that we want to figure out. All right. So in that way, what we'll do is we'll gather case studies, which will say, okay, this seemed to work, that didn't, and so on. And ultimately get to a point where we can come up with some standards by which institutional research software policy can be developed. All right. More specifically, here's in our case statement, we went and we put together 5 key aims and deliverables. So first one is, identify existing policies that are there, and we'll put that together into a database. Then we'll collate, so that's one deliverable. The second is to collate resources that support policy change. Okay. The third is, in terms of reading through all of this and understanding a common framework for research policy. So that'll be that third deliverable. The fourth is identifying where policies are lacking, where are the gaps? And again, there'll be another report on that. And finally, there's the identification of case studies to increase adoption. All right. And again, we need your help on this. So please consider joining this working group. And as Dan put, this is our sort of first guess in terms of what we think should be done here, but we'd love to hear your input on that. Okay. So again, just to stress, Pro4RS is not working in a vacuum. There's lots of other activities there which we can learn from, and hopefully we can also push into. So, for example, one thing we can certainly say is that this feeds into UN Sustainable Development Goals, so particularly SDG 9, about building research infrastructure, resilient infrastructure, all right? And that, again, sort of has some indirect effects on things like good health and well-being, affordable and clean energy, climate action. But there are also sort of clear the potential links with other initiatives that are out there. So, for example, the Adore software toolkit. Reza is already in another partnership with Force 11, which has a task force on code availability. And then there's the UNESCO Open Science Toolkit. As an initial study, we've already sort of pulled together a handful of organizations, mostly they're all based in Anglo-Saxon countries at the present moment, ranging, from Illinois, Manchester, Notre Dame, UCL, Alan Turing Institute, and Monash. So this is some of the points that can help us here. And then we have other organizations such as CERN and MPI, which have policies on, say, software licensing, which we can work. So this is our kind of an initial list. And the other point to stress is that we want to look at a variety of different aspects. So the issue of funding, career paths, citation of software, and so on. All of these points, these are the things that we're looking for. one thing, this is kind of getting to the wrapping up point, is that, as you said at the start of this section, there's a close relationship between open source software and research software, but they're not. The Venn diagram is like they're overlapping, but they are, that one is not the subset of the other. So there's plenty of open source software, which is certainly not research software, but likewise, not all research software is necessarily open. All right, and that's, you need to tease out those specific points. All right. So, but all of this, again, all of this sort of feeds into what we're doing nonetheless. Last thing I also want to talk about is that this, in many respects, came out of some initial work which was carried out last year, which was a workshop that was held in the Netherlands. This was organized by the Netherlands eScience Center, based at NVO, VU Amsterdam, and TU Delft. Right? And again, it was sort of asking those initial questions that was there, which kind of came out from this. And I think this particular slide here is kind of a nice one, so that even in the Netherlands, where things are always, I'm not getting paid for this, and I don't even live in the Netherlands, but Netherlands always sort of seems to be the exemplar for everything. Even there, they're saying, hang on, most institutions don't have a research software policy. Okay, so I think that's everything at this stage. So so I'm just going to pass over to Pedro on the setting up the discussion. All right.
Thank you very much, Hugh and Daniel. Before going into the group discussion, actually, we would like to hear some initial comments, initial questions. Is there anything maybe online? Any questions that we have in the Zoom link? And also, I would like to invite Professor Jeremy Cohen. Are you there? Can you hear us?
I can hear you. Can you hear me there in the room?
Yes, perfect. Would you like to make some key annotation on what we just have discussed, especially on the first efforts that we saw in the last slide that you were there in this event? Any remarks?
I mean, I think just to really kind of reiterate the material that Hugh presented, and to say that I think there's obviously, this is a challenging task to try and develop policies to support these things, as was highlighted in the chat. One of the points there made by Neil, that that not all software is the same. Effectively, I think is the point being made, and that there are different types of software and different challenges that will come into play when looking at finding policies or developing policies to support these. Yeah, I think otherwise, more generally, very interested to hear what the audience thinks, and what people either online or in person in the room think about the plans and the approaches here, and what comments there are to add in.
All right, so we're gonna get a microphone.
Yeah, thanks for this introduction. And Raphael Ritz, Max Planck Society, more precisely Max Planck Computing and Data Facility. I'm also just 2 or 3 pointers. I'm also involved in an activity in the context of the EOSC Association. As some people here in the room may know, the EOSC Association has a number of task forces in order to help moving EOSC forward and further developing the strategic innovation and research agenda, the multi-annual roadmap, and how these things are called that govern and steer this endeavor. And one of the task forces there is on infrastructure for quality research software. And so Uwe Konrad, for instance, or myself, and probably even some people here in the room are involved in that effort. That is for the current phase actually coming to an end, but most likely to be continued. Yet to be decided, but we assume, or we already got signals in that direction, that this effort will be continued. And while it's not primarily on policies, it could very well include activities on policies when it comes to making suggestion how to move EOSC forward. So that might be another initiative. I noticed you've mentioned a few that could be of interest here, and that I think Uwe and myself and others are willing to be the bridge in this endeavor. And the other remark that just occurred to me while seeing the slides, when it comes to research assessment and incentives, in addition to DORA, which was explicitly mentioned, there is, at least in Europe, more recently, a follow-up initiative called COARA, the Coalition for the Advancements of Research Assessment, which by now is endorsed by a significant number of European research performing organizations. I don't know whether there are any across beyond Europe already committed, but that is another potential group to eventually target with the outcomes of this endeavor. Thanks.
Yeah, just as it's moving around, I'll just mention the adore.software declaration that you mentioned, which is aimed at software funders. We're looking at Quora as the example kind of how to do that. So we certainly are aware of Quora.
Okay, I have to be short because I have to have my train. I just want to say that at Helmholtz in Germany, we have an initiative since about more than 3 years about that. So we have a policy framework for software that has applied to different centers. So we have an exact statistic like the colleague in the Netherlands. So we could show up. I wasn't aware of that group here. That's why I think we could give significant input there. And we had discovered two major challenges, but also opportunities. One is the licensing issue that attracts a lot of not just software developers, but also the technology transfer people, And the other one is if you publish a software policy, you need to accompany that with infrastructure. So support offers and all that stuff. If you don't do that, then it's a kind of theoretical thing and not going into the practical use. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Later on, I will give my name and we can give our data.
Oh, thank you very much. Hugh, any? Here's we have another one. Yeah.
Yeah, and just as a comment as we're starting, if anybody that wants to volunteer for anything, whether that's providing policies or information, please put your name in the shared notes, because then we'll be able to capture it and follow
up. Thanks very much for the introduction to this project. It's super interesting, super timely. My name is Limor Pierre. I'm from Yale University, and I'm also one of the co-chairs of the Reproducibility Interest Group. So Dan was at our session this morning. I think there's a lot of connections, and your focus on sustainability and reproducibility obviously is very key to what we're doing. So I'm definitely foreseeing some connections there. But I guess I had maybe it's a clarification question. Since the statistic was put up that about 50% of faculty, so I think you said 50% of the faculty say that they actually develop
of researchers.
Researchers. Yes, correct. Researchers. Do we have a sense of how, I guess what I'm getting at is, will these policies or recommendations for the policies going to also include commercial software? Are there going to be recommendations for research software that is used heavily in the institution to do research, but are maybe outside the university can't impose its conditions on it in any way, but it might help guide them to choose which vendors to decide?
Yeah, that's a good question that I don't think we really talked about at all. So it's good to capture that for further discussion. Jeremy has his hand up because he wanted to say a few things, I think.
Thanks, Dan. Yeah, I was just going to highlight actually a couple of points that were made online. So there was a point made about whether RDA is the right venue for these guidelines or this kind of policy development. And I think that's a really important point, because I think that, my personal feeling is that obviously the link between software and data is something which is is very important. And when we have groups that are supporting working groups or standards development or whatever that don't have that crossover represented, I think it's very easy to get to end up with outputs that are very focused on either just software or just data or just infrastructure or whatever the groups are focusing on. So I think having this group, from a personal perspective, I feel like having this group under RDA is actually really important. But I'd be very keen to hear other people's kind of views on where we think that crossover between software and data is important and generates value in this context.
Any other further comment in chat? I think that was addressed.
I don't, Neil, did you want to? You've been putting in a lot of comments. I don't know if you want to say anything or not.
Thanks, Dan. It's can you hear me in the room there?
Yep, you're fine.
Yeah, it's a really interesting discussion. I'm glad this group is getting set up. I wanted to kind of just comment a little bit in terms of some of the things that have come up and trying to make sure that we create a framework of policies that is achievable and adoptable by the wide variety of researchers that are going to be affected by them. So we were one of the people who did the background work to show that there were more than 50% of researchers that were developing code. But it should be acknowledged that most of those people are developing code in the form of scripts that are on existing platforms. So things like MATLAB, for instance, and SPSS, which may be commercial. And so I think that policies at the highest level should be able to be understood and apply to all researchers, which means that we do need to include commercial software. But there are many things that you can do to improve practice that will apply equally to all software being used.
Thank you, Neil. And I'll just say as well, we asked the same question in the US version, which we were addressing towards postdocs, and there we found 25% as opposed to 50. And whether that's based on career stage or something else, we're not sure yet.
Excellent. Can we switch back towards the presentation? So, all right. So this actually lead us to co-create. This is, as Dan has indicated, a little bit of a survey, but a little bit of a brainstorming together. So we have heard a couple of things related to, okay, shall we include things like third-party commercial agreements? Shall we include things like software citations? Shall we include certain things on a high level or applicability level? So let's see what we can come up with it together. Also, people online, please feel free to scan the code. Yep. I'm gonna go to the Yep.
So was there anybody that still needed that, or is everybody okay? So can we go back for just 1 minute?
Yes. Can I get the browser view? Yes. Excellent. Is this visible also for people in online, right? Excellent. Yeah, we're good to go.
Okay, it's in the chat. Thank you.
All right. So as we have mentioned, I'm gonna start really with a warm-up question because we are 9 questions to go, and these questions, some of them will be multiple choice, some of them will be about a little bit of a scoring and ranking, and we're gonna kind of gauge what we think about things. So let me start with a warm-up question. How are the energy levels towards the end of the conference? People online. yeah, you're on the comfortability of your place. Maybe you can handle one more session after this one, the closing event. We didn't know if we were lucky to be the last session or we were unlucky to be the last session, actually. But so, yeah, we have quite some people that are actually looking forward to go home. Yeah, I mean, it's been really nice, but it's been a long week. We have learned a lot of things, but also there's nothing like sleeping at your own bed, right? All right. So this is just again the warm up, and for the people that have not joined, you can go to wooclap.com and then insert the code, and you'll get there. Right. So I will move along. Now let's get real. So coming back to the first slide from Hugh, like, you know, we already discussed, and I think was clear that research software, because it has certain attributes beyond zeros and ones, is different from research data. That's fine. But what comes to mind when you hear research software? You know, what's the first thing that comes to mind? Again, this is multiple choice. You can, you know, select one or more. What really comes to mind? So is it like computing code? Like, you know, in those statistics, there is a heavily influence from early career researchers that are actually creating their studies, their data analysis, their software code, and they actually write scripts in order to get their publication out. That's the computing code. That's data analysis scripts, and so on. But is it also open source projects, like as we have already explored? Open source and research software, they have certain overlap, but it's not like they are a subset of each other. A very common one when we are dealing with fields that need simulations or visualization or those type of things, there's a variety of options, a variety of softwares and tooling. What comes to mind? Now, let me tell you that for the people that have chosen for option 2 and option 6, for example, it's a little bit tricky here, because first of all, the community is also trying to come up with a definition of what we should include in research software and what is open source software and so on. So indeed, sometimes when you hear research software, you can think of, okay, MATLAB or Jupyter Notebooks. However, we can say that those are applications, scientific applications, or in any case, software tools that are used in research, right? So let's try to consider, you know, so again, we don't want to say that there is like a good response or bad response, but what we can say is that MATLAB code is research software. MATLAB, the program, is software used in research.
I was just going to say, there's 6 people that said something else, and it would be interesting if any of them want to say what they meant by something else.
Someone here in the room?
Or online.
Online? From the people that indicated something else?
I'm from the computer science background. So, for example, compiler or programming language, I consider to be research software.
Yeah, that's a good one. Yeah, and I think it's also within the scope. Compilers, but also, you know, compiled scientific packages. That's also, yeah, different programming languages.
I didn't flag it as something else, but I actually chose option 6, interpreting the question slightly differently. I did not equate that as Jupyter Notebook, the technology, but instances of Jupyter Notebooks that people write and thereby write software and use that then oftentimes in a collaborative setting or for a publication, and at least in that aspect, I don't see that actually even covered in the options here.
Yeah, that's correct. That was a little bit on purpose. So to get, I mean, you see, these are the differences. Indeed, instances or notebooks that are result from a research project that was created on a Jupyter Notebook technology, and that sometimes are published or shared in collaborative environments like GitHub, GitLab, etc. That is research software. Some cases, it ended up being open source, collaborative aspect. Sometimes it just work within the context of the project, right? Sometimes you go with different programming languages or just a compilation of different aspects. But yeah, I guess at this point, we are more or less getting the idea of what it is.
I guess just to mention, one of the notes was from Neil commenting that that he was thinking about lab equipment control software, the software that manages and controls experiments, for example. And I was going to also ask Moran put in a note about that she voted for something else, and I was curious if she wanted to say what something else was.
Thanks, Dan, for giving me the hand. But it's just all the items on the list can be research software, and each of them can also be created outside academic context. So I've written that and chose the something else option for that. Thanks, Dan.
Okay, thank you.
Excellent.
So
yes, please go ahead.
Comments. One more further back.
And another thing that would go under something else here, if you want to consider that, are electronic lab notebooks. And I appreciate that this is borderline, as it's more like a tool in order to do research. It's realized in software typically, and as such, it's not that people would be developing electronic lab notebooks, or at least it may seem like that, but we do, for instance, in one of the NFDI consortia in the physical sciences, we do have an effort in order to establish interoperability between measurement devices and electronic lab notebooks. Where do you put that?
Yeah, that's an excellent point. And another example, actually, coming from that, we can see that there is this tool for qualitative data analysis, atlas.ti, and that started back in the 90s, TU Berlin, TU Dublin. So as a research software project, right? It was a package that will help researchers and so on and so forth. Fast forward, right now it's a commercial tool, right? So yeah, some things start like a research software project, you know, some developers started to develop some packages in certain language and evolved into a bigger, broader thing. Yes.
So for me, the difference basically is, you know, like what is the specifics of research, any kind of software that you have there. And one thing that distinguishes it from many other applications is higher requirements with reproducibility, traceability, and so on and so forth. And in that context, I guess the differences between the categories are way less important than they might seem in the categorization here, because under something else, I would definitely go all the way to the bias setup and calibration on sensors that are deployed in their environment, Internet of Things, because we need to actually get an end-to-end hold of it. So calibration functions, bias functionality will need to be recreated, redeployed if we want to replicate a study, or if we want to set, you know, identical pre-processing routines for the raw data that is then fed into subsequent analysis. So I'd really view this as an end-to-end pipeline. And that's why also the difference between the software and the program running the software is, to me, a quite arbitrary differentiation, because MATLAB code doesn't run without MATLAB, and it might produce different results depending on the very software version that you have. It might even produce different results depending on whether it's running on Windows or on Mac or on Linux environments, depending on the libraries that are used from the operating system underneath, or of booster chips and hardware that you have in there. So I'm also involved in a high-performance computing environment where we keep some old HPC machines that are far from HPC today. still active in order to have identical performance of some code that was written for those machines. The code would run on newer machines as well, but it would compute something different. So it's really, the question is, why do we need those differentiations when the ultimate goal requires the entire stack to go?
Excellent.
Yeah, so just to comment on that, I would say that I agree with what you're saying, but I don't think there's anything specific about MATLAB, right? We have the same issue with R or Python or any, yeah. So, okay, good.
Software ends the inheritance. So all the compilers that were mentioned before, so well, I didn't want to single out MATLAB.
Okay.
I picked up on the G and the two.
Yeah, that's fine. One other quick point just from the notes is that I'm assuming this is Moran put this in, but I'm not completely sure. Somebody put in there's a definition from the FAIR for Research Software Output that is a kind of a definition of research software, or at least a discussion about research software's definition. And so if you're looking at the notes, it might be worth looking at that blue box, because we kind of went through a long discussion and tried to come up with some consensus and couldn't completely agree, but kind of tried fairly hard.
Yeah, we are. Yeah, I think it's going to be somehow a moving concept. Yes.
One more from you, and then we'll go.
Yeah, oh yes, please.
Sorry, yeah, no. Sorry, I'm saying this by the door so that if I get chased out, then I can make a quick exit. So the other, I want to say this as carefully as possible. I'm stepping on people's toes here, but we have, of course, in that inefficiency course, part of that is researchers using tools that they're using in a programmatic way without realizing it, and it's really doing it in a spectacularly bad way. And the emphasis there is Excel macros. So plenty of examples of researchers who design stupidly complicated Excel macros because this is the thing that they know. And I'm not going to say, oh, that's research software, but it's in terms of policy.
Yes.
Actually, there's a thing where you saying, hey, how do we take those people by the hand and say, listen, that's grand, but there's an easier, better way of doing things.
That's correct, because there's not much interoperability and reproducibility going on in those aspects. Please.
Sorry.
Unless he has at this point, is it on this point?
Oh.
Just a comment. I'm more on the researcher side. Maximilian Gruber, National Metrology Institute from Germany, or of Germany. Regarding a policy on research software, I could also imagine not trying to cover all aspects of research software, just saying, okay, when we speak of research software and this policy, we explicitly mean these kinds of things. Other types could also be research software, but they should probably be covered by some other policy, or need to have a very not too strict, how is it called? Should not follow too strict to these rules, but need to make some adjustments in order to still fulfill policy. Yeah.
A little bit of reducing the scope. That's very useful. Please.
Okay, so I'm really stuck on the sustainability piece of all of this, and it just made me think, following up on the conversation here about MATLAB, that will the policies, will they also explain what is required of the institution in order to be able to sustain and maintain? I'm thinking of here at my institution at Yale, they came up with the EASY, emulation as a service idea, so like what kind of solutions or will there be guidance along those lines? So that's on the one hand, if you want to be able to achieve the sustainability of the research and the software. On the other hand, might there be situations where it's okay that the code is inefficient, where you don't need to, where it's okay to just throw it away after a while, and not worry about that. And I don't know if that would be illuminated too.
Yeah, so I'll just say that I think if we're thinking about policy or policy effectively, I'm coming up with this definition, I mean, right now, which is probably a bad idea because there probably is a good definition of policy somewhere, but we could think of policy as kind of rules and guidance that's intended to create some particular behavior. And so I don't think we know what the right behavior is yet. So I don't, it's going to be very hard to answer your question because it probably depends on what the institution actually wants to do. So it might be, maybe there's a split that for some, as the other person was saying, for some software, there's this policy. For other kinds of software, there's this policy, and there's not any one policy for software in general.
Yes, and actually we'll go into that. That's going to be question 7. And that's why, so the next one is like trying to get a picture of that. Does your organization currently have a research software policy, given that we more or less understand right now what we talk about when we talk about policy and what we talk about when we talk about research software? It's also very valid to say, I don't know, you know, it's like, yeah, maybe. It looks like there's a department or a unit that they might be looking into that, but I'm not sure because I'm more in the, maybe in the research data part of things. Yes. So for example, in my institution, Master University, yes, we do. But also the thing is that my institution is very heavily on humanities and medical sciences. Therefore, yeah, they say, okay, let's do research software policy within the scope of open science, let's say. But in more technical universities, like my friends here from TU Delft, they will say, no, we need a specific policy, rules, and guidelines for research software. So yeah, sometimes it depends. It's a part of a broader policy. Sometimes you just say, okay, there's certain code of conduct, or there's a research department that have released some sort of best practices in their website, but in the guidelines type of fashion. Yes.
Very quickly.
Because I just like to ask people who are in FDIs. There are a few here, I suppose, at least you mentioned you are. If there is any kind of meeting, I thought there was among an FDI leaders to discuss common grounds for research and that sort of thing, and that would be a good topic, no?
Yes, indeed, there is, since you asked. Within the context of the NFDI, we have established what we call sections addressing cross-cutting topics. And by that, we mean issues that apply to many, if not all, of the consortia, which are typically focusing on a specific scientific subject matter, sometimes on specific technologies or technology areas. But in these cross-cutting topics, in these sections, we have several. One actually focusing on ethical, legal, and social aspects. And in this context, such things are being addressed. No result yet to the best of my knowledge, but it's on the agenda.
There is also a working group on research software engineer, and it is linked to the German Research Software Engineer Association. So to repeat to the online audience, there is a working group, a part of what it is called NFDI infrastructure section. There is a research software engineer working group on that. There is another working group for research software metadata, which is part of the metadata section. And there is also the German Research Software Engineer Association that it is working tied to these two groups.
Excellent. Can I maybe, I was curious on, there's 2 people that responded, no, but we are planning to. Is there someone here in the room or those is maybe online that responded? We are planning to. It's a little bit too on the spotlight, a little bit too much. you are welcome to join the group, because that's one of the things that we are trying to address, is to have use cases along the way. So we're going to work this year, and we're going to bring use cases, like real use cases of policy adoption and policy development. So if you are planning to, please don't hesitate to join the group, because that's the perfect setup. All right. An open-ended question. We wanted to pick up your brains. How shall we, this is not an open-ended, this is a ranking mechanism. How should we prioritize research software policy topics? We already discussed things like licensing, like intellectual property rights, citation. This question tries to understand, how do we prioritize those topics? What comes first, what comes later, what we should focus. So if you see in the user interface, you can sort out the different topics, which one goes first, which one goes last. I'll give you a second. Also, the people joining online, here we go. Yes. Yeah, we can see that one of the important topics is indeed career recognition for software engineers and developers, because it's really one of the gaps, is that if there is a lot of importance on developing these, we've seen that many research departments and research units are actually hiring full stack developers, or just simply paying for that development time. But what happens is that these developers or these software engineers, they leave after a year or after 2 years when the project finished, because, well, there's no incentives to continue, the project is done, and I get paid better in industry, right? So shall this be something to discuss in the policy? We see also the training and capacity, because again, many of these research software and code and scripts are written by early stage researchers. And then they are trained to do research, right? And then they are there to do research. Nonetheless, they are writing code. So should their time also be spent on learning skills of how to write better code? Because there are plenty of the standards for full stack developers. Shall they also learn those things or not?
Yeah, unfortunately, I feel like this is one where the user interface of this tool is not particularly helpful in terms of presenting the results.
Too much information.
Yes. Yes. Yeah. So apparently these are the most frequent combinations. So are all these topics that any other topic that you would think of? Are we missing? Yeah. Also the whole topic of knowledge transfer and knowledge valorization, how to commercialize software or whatever code, applications, and development that was created in a research project. Sometimes there are research units or projects that say, okay, you know what? We can, in order to preserve the project, we need to partially commercialize this package, this tool, this application, so that the software can sustain itself. Yeah, there's a lot of questions on knowledge transfer, valorization, intellectual property. Yes, should this be included in the policy? Another type of policy. So as we have discussed, that one of the gaps is indeed to recognize the effort that is put on creating research software, especially if you are coming from a solution like you put like, okay, I'm doing Excel macros or any other, old-fashioned application. And now in order to go more sustainable, more interoperable, more publishable, I need to put some effort into now put all these old-fashioned package into a more modern R package and publish it on R CRAN, right? But there's a lot of effort. So, but then if that's going to be a scientific output, how do we support and recognize that?
Right. And just as a quick comment that this is going to give us a word cloud. So that's why we're asking for short phrases. Each phrase will be as you say.
Yeah. Yeah, you can see that, software citation, it's indeed one of the mechanisms that can allow us to, recognize that software that is published. Again, just carry on with example of, I developed a R code on published on R CRAN. Sometimes it's mentioned in a publication, but it's not necessarily properly cited.
Right. And I'll just comment, at least that for me, this is not really working quite as well as I thought either. So
yes, next time we're gonna try to do Mentimeter or something else. Citation, reproducibility, resources, quality. Yes, that to try to focus on quality of the code and try to do and to develop with best practices in mind from the very beginning, because what we've seen also sometimes is that the researcher is working so much on the content and on the methods, on the data analysis, and they have, you've seen this very often, untitled notebooks and infinitely, right? So they are not thinking best practices by design, which might come up with extra efforts at the end. Yes, we've seen also the importance of persistent identifiers, just like we see on publications and data. That's something we need to catch up on software and possibly included in policies and policy conversations.
I think we're gonna have to look at the answers individually more than looking at the word cloud.
Yep. Yeah, high promotion. Yeah. All right. We'll have these results, and the results also will be shared in the working document as well as the presentation. So now a little bit of a hands-on type of question. If you were to implement research software policies in your organization, or you would like to recommend someone to implement those policies, and it's, let's imagine that it's in your hands, what would be the challenges, right? Gaining stakeholder interest, meaning, the funder or maybe the managing directors of my institute, they are so busy on education type of policies, internationalization type of policies. And if I tell them about research software policies, are they going to even listen? Very common, we see the resistance to change within the organization. We saw that a couple of years ago with research data and trying to put some more efforts into publishing research data in trusted repositories. Budgetary constraints, that's also a recurrent challenge, especially in new type of policy development. Another challenging aspect that we see that some people are already responding, the difficulty of monitoring or enforce the policies, right? So we can say, you know, you should develop your code in this fashion with these best practices published in certain open source repositories, and cite your software X or Y or Z method. How do we enforce this? Is it a self-enforced type of thing? Yes. Thank you.
I want to make a comment here about monitoring and enforcement. And what comes to my mind is this nice pyramid that supposedly has making it easier on the basis, but it is actually the other way around. Why do we do research data management plans? Because the funders ask us to do so. It's not because we have the infrastructure, because it is easy, because we have all the means, because of, it's really the other way around. And we are starting with all of these by enforcement. For all of us that are trying to do something along fair for research software, policies for research software, why people in our teams, in our institutes start doing this? Because we are telling them and we are convincing them. They are not seeing kind of the recognition, the benefit yet. No, the truth is that they are not seeing it yet. So yeah, it's something that maybe we need to take into account.
Yeah. Dan?
So just, I guess, just as a comment on that, Neil, who has left us offline or on, yeah, who was online and is now offline. Instead of having the pyramid, he does this as a circle, because you could start at any point and then you need the other pieces to make that happen. And so maybe that makes more sense in this context.
Right. And at the end, we've seen a very recurring challenge, which is a lack of organizational support. Even though we go home, we go back to our institution and say, okay, this is important. The policy officer should look into that. The research data officer should look into that. But you know, if higher management are not really supporting this, well, where is this going to go, right? And again, we see that the developers, like in a very bottom-up approach, you see that they're, how can I say, there are a lot of documentation nerds around there, right? So there's a lot of people that love documentation, and I know people also from my institution, they love to write best practices and publish it. And you know, now what about, you know, combining those efforts and that forward thinking into also organizational level, right? So it should be a combination between top down and bottom up. All right. Coming back to a little bit of a tricky one. Let's try to score. I don't think we didn't think of, as Dan has mentioned before, policies is something that we want to induce certain behavior, but we don't know actually yet what that behavior should be, right? So that's why the question of how should we frame these policies? Because as we discussed, should be different from research data. Therefore, research software policies should be more like a flexible guidelines, just like these documentation nerds that they publish best practices all over the internet. So we really like just guidelines and see who follows it, and a little bit of a social peer pressure type of thing, or really strict regulations where the organization says, you know, if you really want to commercialize certain research software, you should follow this path. And if you don't do that, something will happen. I don't know. So encourage recommendations. Yeah, that's a safe space. Yeah, I think we agree that, yeah, if we do this very, very strict, especially when thinking about the difference with data, that this is creative. This is creative work, and if you tell a painter, an artist, that you should stick in the box, that might be tricky. So the strict regulations should be yes, please.
Hello, I'm at the University of Copenhagen, where I was responsible for our data management policy. And I think it depends a little bit on how your organization considers the concept policy. For us, the concept policy is very clearly a document. When it is approved by research leadership, it actually ties the research leadership to starting to engage in activities that will support the policy. So it actually must, when you call it a policy, you must do it, and we actually must follow up on it. We must evaluate and have measure compliance to it. So if you don't see it as strict regulation, I don't think you, in many cases, you wouldn't call it a policy, at least not in our organization.
That's an excellent point.
Good. I think Leila was. Sorry.
So quick comment, maybe it would be good if you define what you mean by policy. I struggled with the word, so I had to look for the definition, and the definition that I found is a set of guidelines that will be supported by processes and procedures. So maybe the processes and the procedures are the ones that can become strict regulations, but the policy, if it is a set of guidelines, maybe not strict regulation, but it also depends. But try to define what you mean by.
Yeah, and I guess, sorry, what I was going to say, I think Leila and I were kind of raising our hands at the same time, was I guess I was thinking of this as guidelines and recommendations, because it would be something if you, let's say a department should include information about research software when they're promoting faculty, for example, could be a guideline, but it would be very hard to be very strict about what that should be. So that was at least why I was not on the side of strictness. But maybe different institutions maybe have different purposes.
Please, Cesar.
Thanks. One thing that I thought of as well is that it could be a mixture of those things. You could have some topics that you think, okay, we want this as a strict regulation in order to be interoperable or fair. And then others that you are more, you give recommendations that you say, okay, we worked on this together. We know that there might be too much diversity in institutions to implement this as a strict regulation, but we would recommend you to try this or that.
If I can say one more thing, I just did a ISO 27001 exam last week, and there they also have the concept of a policy. It's a high-level document at the overarching level of an organization that sets an overarching level for like an overarching goal for the organization, which can then be supplemented by more discipline-specific or research group-specific guidelines, which then take the overarching policy concepts into context. So yeah, that's how we would see it. Policies overarching with the concepts, and then you have associated guidelines that have the detailed stuff, more discipline specific.
That sounds very logical, please.
Thank you. I'm Willem-Jan Knibbe from Wageningen University in Research, and I would like to add on your point that I do think a mixture could be helpful, since there may be cases where you as an organization may appreciate strict regulations. For instance, in our case, we are sometimes asked to advise government by researchers using models, and government tends to, hopefully at least, appreciate our advice and makes decisions based on what our researchers advised. And then civilians may or may not be happy with the decisions made by government and may question the advice. And in that case, as an organization, you are very much helped by strict regulations outlining how, for instance, to maintain the quality of your model calculations. And if you only give that as a recommendation, you may run serious risks in processes like that. Whereas in other cases, of course, as you mentioned, you want to experiment and you cannot use strict regulations in experimenting with your software. So I do think a mixture could be very helpful.
Yeah, this is something that we have mentioned, but not really considered. Actually, it's a great point. if we come up with a set of principles or overall framework for writing or developing research software policy, maybe you want to consider like breaking it down into topics, and that could indeed be more smooth approach or smoother approach to this. All right. Another kind of sorting the priorities. So we know that we need to cater different research needs. Yes, and again, coming back to the comment of how policies, where should they come from? Because we want to assert certain behavior. Should it come, if I'm a research group, a research unit, which policy do I listen to it more? The funder one, the one of my field, the one of my institution, because sometimes, as we've seen in data, there are certain overlaps between policies, but sometimes you have certain things like, we've seen open data and GDPR. It's not that they are contradictory, but sometimes are tricky within each other. Yeah, so the most frequent combination, we see that organization-specific policies, then domain-specific, and then funder-oriented policies. So yeah, as it was phrased at the beginning, the aim of the working group is to support research-performing organizations, which are, those can be universities, projects, or funding bodies. So that's why also the categorization of how they should be oriented towards too. Okay. Finally, I see in the room that there's some people that have been involved in developing the research data policy. What can we learn from those efforts? So, I guess we would really appreciate if really like people joining the working group, that there's not only research software practitioners or some sort of a program coordinators like myself, or people involved in open science and open source like Hugh or Dan, but also like Susanna has mentioned, like policy people, with certain accreditations. I think that should be really helpful because this is a very tricky topic. Yeah, I like the community consensus. I think that's one of the somehow activities and deliverables of this working group, to work in this type of setups. We're aiming to have a webinar in Work Package 2, Deliverable 2, in a couple of months. And yeah, to have some sort of a second iteration of this, because, we need community consensus. That's one of the bottom line activities, that we understand what we're talking about when we talk about research software. We are all in the same page when we talk about policy, and we are all on the same page when we discuss the topics. Bottom-up approach. It's hard to prioritize policy compliance when time and money is short. Absolutely. But again, I really like the idea of, policy. It's a high level concept that would be supported by guidelines on the way. educate faculty. I don't know exactly what that would mean. Educate on policy, educate on or educate on research software. Right. Educate faculty about new policy. This keeps popping up.
Or even just about the policy.
Or about the policy, yeah. But to understand there is any policy, it's a good policy, it's wonderful.
It's mandatory.
It's mandatory, and that's it. Well, I really like this one. Design implementation plans. In some institutions in the Netherlands where I'm more familiar with, there were action plans designed when research data policies were published. Their action plans might help. Policy champions, that's a good one. Like, I guess that worked for research data. Like, who wants to really champion the effort? We should come up with something like that. All right. Yes.
Thinking about the exercise on fair for research software, something that worked nicely was giving examples of early adopters.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's excellent. Yeah, that's hopefully it turns out well. It's deliverable 4 or 5, if I'm not mistaken. And if you know people working on research software policy, want to join the group, we are, as Dan mentioned at the beginning, we are setting up, well, a list / database of all these research software policies, either from universities, research performing organizations, funders, etc. And we want to create some sort of a catalog of what these things include, and come up with use cases of these early adopters. So with that, I think we have discussed quite some good stuff. Dan, would you like to wrap up a little bit and really have the last chunk of the session?
Okay. All right. Yeah, thanks. So thanks again to everybody for participating, for giving us ideas, for adding notes, for working on the survey. So where we are now, the case study was approved by TAB, actually, I don't know, a month ago or so. We're still looking for any feedback and comments, and we certainly can make changes. We would like you to join the working group if you're interested, whether you're interested in this research software part directly, or whether you have experiences with research data policies and you just want to share with a larger community what worked or what didn't work and help us that way. That would be great as well. As we have meetings and discussions, we'll use the mailing list from the working group page to communicate with people. So that really is the way to keep in touch. In addition, we have the Research Software Alliance, and in the Research Software Alliance Slack is another way of communicating with people about activities in research software. And RISA has a newsletter that comes out once a month. It just came out about 2 hours ago, in fact. So it'll be about another month until the next one. And so again, if you're interested in research software news, that's a good thing to do as well. And then finally, right, we've got, I don't know, maybe 30 people that have been in the room and online. If you know of other people that would be interested, please let them know, encourage them to join as well. Going to RISA briefly, just to mention what's going on. So the Research Software Alliance, I'm the steering committee chair for that. So I'll just kind of say a couple of things about it briefly as we wrap up. It has a number of initiatives going on. One is a funders forum where we have about somewhere between 30 and 50 funding organizations that support research software, where the people, the program officers get together and they talk about what works and what doesn't, how they should run calls, how they should do reviews, how they could work multilaterally, other things like that. This is the group that put together this Amsterdam Declaration on funding research software sustainability, which has just been out now for signature about the last month or so. There's also some work that RISA has been doing in terms of policy making. And so we've been working with OECD and UNESCO on their recommendations, as well as trying to track national policies around research software. We have a community forum that has had a meeting last month and has another meeting coming up this month to bring together community leaders that are interested in talking about what they're doing in their organizations and how they can work effectively with other organizations. We have working with community influencers, the FAIR software principles, for example, have come out, and we have a bunch of different organizations that are implementing them and adopting them, but we're always looking for more, as well as for the status of what's worked and what hasn't from the organizations that are doing that. And then finally, there is a RISA task force on code availability by publishers, where we had actually a brief meeting yesterday, I guess, at lunchtime. And we're there trying to work on how publishers can better align their policies about what code needs to be available, how it's made available, what this actually means, how it gets reviewed, things like that. And then finally, just to wrap up, RISA has been basically has a number of founding members that are listed on the top here, and then a number of organizational members. And so if your organization is interested in supporting research software and you'd like to become an organizational member, you can go to the RISA website and you'll see some ways to do that. With that, we'll just wrap up and say thank you again very much for attending. We will almost certainly have something in plenary 22 in the spring, as well as the plenary 23 in the fall. As you've probably heard, plenary 22 will be virtual only. Plenary 23 in the fall will be hybrid. So we look forward to seeing you either online or in person in one of those two next meetings. And we also will almost certainly have some activities between now and then as well. So thank you very much.
Thank you.